Welcome everybody back into Nerd Sesh. As always, I'm Carson Breber and alongside me is Logan Camden. And today we are doing a mailbag episode. We asked you all what questions you had for us, and today your voices will be heard. This is all NFL, and we're starting predictably with the big news story of the week around the league. Jay Rizzo asks, with Davante Adams requesting a trade, do you think he's worth the value of a second-round pick and additional compensation? And how much value do you think he adds to a potential suitor? Do you think he even gets traded this year? And if so, to who, Logan?
So I do think he's worth a second-round pick. I would give up a second and a fourth or a second and a fifth. You think about what the Niners were asking for a guy like Brandon Ayuk in the offseason. And for any number one kind of freak athletic receiver, I think that's what you give up. I think that's good value for a guy like that.
Wouldn't you think that Davante, because of the age, might have a more similar package to like a Diggs? Now, I think that he's better than Diggs, but I think Ayuk, part of the upside is he still has so much prime left.
Well, I think you make a good point there with his age, but the reason that I think Davante has similar value to him is because Davante's under contract, right? The issue with trading for a guy like Ayuk is you're going to pay him at the top of the market. You're going to pay him, like a number one receiver. You don't have to work out the contract details with Davante. So I think that's something that works in his favor a little bit. And I still do think Davante is right on the edge of the top five receiver range. So... And I still think, he might not be in his prime, but I still think he can put up number one receiver numbers. The second part of this question, well, first, what do you think? Let's go question by question. Do you agree with that assessment of value, or how much would you give up to get Davante?
I think that he is worth a second rounder. I don't know about that much additional compensation because, again, I do think about the Diggs package, and that was Diggs and a sixth and a fifth for a second rounder back that was also a year in the future. I thought that was good value, and I think that there's a separation between Davante Adams and Stephon Diggs right now. I think Diggs is playing like a top 20 sort of receiver. I think when you look at Davante's production with bad quarterback play, and then you look at the most recent production when he had average quarterback play and it was 1,500 yards, 15 touchdowns, that's the last that we've seen from Davante Adams with a decent quarterback. So I absolutely think he's still a high-end number one. I think he's like a top 8 receiver. But I don't know about a second and a fourth. I mean, honestly, push comes to shove. If I were one of these teams that really thought that he could put me over the top, I'd probably be willing to do it because I think he's such a bankably elite player. But you are paying him a lot. You're right, the contract is locked in, but it is a very high dollar value for a dude who is old and is definitely in the tail end of his prime. But I absolutely think he can put some teams over the top. And I think if there should be a very heated market for him because he's still a game-changing player.
I agree, and considering there's no clear-cut number one team in the NFL to me, you know what I mean? I still think it's the Chiefs, but because the NFL feels open at this point in the season, I do think that teams should be chomping at the bit to go and acquire a guy like Davante. And so in terms of value that he adds to a suitor, I completely agree with you, Carson. I think he just takes any offense that he would be traded to up another notch. How much value exactly, I think, depends on what quarterback he gets sent to, because I think you're right. Davante is a guy that can overcome his QB situation, but the multiplier effect kind of that you get with Davante all depends on the quarterback throwing him the ball. In a lot of ways, Carson, this reminds me of another Raiders elite wideout that wanted out. It reminds me of Randy Moss back when he was with the Raiders in, the mid-2000s. The Raiders obviously give up just stupid value with Randy. They get a fourth-round pick, and that's it for Randy. That's one of the worst trades in NFL history. But it reminds me of that just because I think Davante is just feeling frustrated with the situation with Minshew, the fact that he doesn't have a guy that can get him the ball. So I think that's number one. When I'm looking at potential suitors for Davante, I want him to go to a team that has an upper echelon quarterback. And I wrote down 3 teams. Number one, the New York Jets. I think that's the one that makes the most sense. He reunites with Aaron Rodgers. They already have chemistry. This is a team that has really good skill position weapons, but when you're talking about adding another guy, I mean, that would be the best number one and number two wideout combination, I think, in the league if you were able to pair Wilson and Davante, and then you have a guy like Breece Hall. So that's one. I considered the Chiefs just because of the injury to Rashee Rice. I don't think that would ever happen just because they're in the same division. That's like a cardinal rule of trading away superstars. One, you don't want to trade them in your conference, right? We think NBA. There's a reason the Timberwolves were okay with giving Cat away to the Knicks. You don't have to see that team a couple times a year. So I think the Chiefs are off the table. The final team that I wrote down here is Cincinnati. And the reason I think Cincinnati makes a little bit of sense is I think they could do a wideout swap. T. Higgins is still looking for his contract, and I think you could give them T. Higgins and maybe like a third-round pick and maybe a sixth or a seventh, or Higgins, and a pair of picks or something like that. And I think you could do a swap, and that would definitely give them the best number one and number two wideout combination. But there's a lot of teams that I think should be interested in getting Davante. But the reason I only write down a few teams is, in my estimation, Carson, I think that if you're going to do this deal for Davante this year, you need to be a team that is confident that they are in the Super Bowl bubble. And if you're not a Super Bowl contender, or you don't think that Davante would put you into that tier, I wouldn't do it. Like, I've heard the Steelers, right? I wouldn't do it if I'm Pittsburgh because I just value that draft compensation more. And this doesn't move the Steelers into Super Bowl contendership to me, right? If I'm a team that's going to do this, I want to be confident that Davante thrusts me into that conversation. And there's only a few teams that I think that Davante really moves a needle like that for me. So who are some potential suitors you think for Davante?
So I had two of the same three that you laid out. I think the Jets are the clear, obvious choice. They should be all over that. If they want to be a serious team, if they want to be a team that we aren't thinking maybe they can sneak into the playoffs, like if they want to have the potential to win playoff games, they just need more offensive talent. Lazard is their most productive receiver right now because teams can dedicate so much attention to Garrett Wilson because there just aren't other threats on the field, and simply because Aaron Rodgers trusts him and has feel with him and has a relationship with him. So if you can inject an elite talent, as you mentioned, forming the best 1-2 punch at receiver in football, and on top of that, it's a dude who can immediately just pick up and play with Rodgers, and they have great chemistry and synergy from all their years of playing together, I think that would be a home run for them. And I do think that they need to add some splashy offensive talent if they want to be a serious playoff team, because the line is just clearly too limited. The run game has been limited. Like, it has to be high-level weapons so you can get the ball out too quickly. Another receiver who can keep the defense honest with Wilson. I think that would be fantastic for them. I also think that this would be great for the Chiefs. It does look like Rashee Rice has avoided an ACL tear, which definitely puts less urgency on them to make a move like this. I think it would put them over the top. I think if Rashee were to miss a significant stretch of time, then that would keep them as the Super Bowl favorite. But with Rashee coming back, I don't think they need to do this. And as you say, there's reporting that the Raiders just wouldn't trade to them, which, by the way, I don't think is good business. If I'm the Las Vegas Raiders, why am I preoccupied about a team standing in my path within my division? Brother, we got to get good first. And to get good, we have to recoup the most possible assets for any player that we're dealing away. And if we can push the Chiefs a little harder, this would have made more sense if Rashee were out. But if we could say, hey, you need this weapon more than anybody else, you can give us the best package, take the best package. I think that that's generally overstated, especially with an older player like Davante, where it's you're not going to see him until the end of time. He's 32 years old. Just focus on building your own team. Don't worry about trying to keep the Chiefs from winning it all. But regardless, that is how they're thinking. So that one's probably not going to happen. The third one, Logan, that I was considering is my Buffalo Bills. And I have been pretty adamant about the fact that I like the Bills receiving core and that I thought people greatly overestimated the loss of Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis, and that there was good depth in this group, and there were dudes who maybe hadn't had the chance to produce with a ton of volume over the entire course of last year, but did so progressively as the year went along and had skill sets I really liked. Dalton Kincaid, Khalil Shakir. They bring in some nice depth pieces. Curtis Samuel solid. Matt Collins is solid. Keon Coleman, I've really liked what I've seen from him so far. But I do think that having a legitimate number one receiver is still a good thing for any offense. And to me, this isn't contradictory to the fact that they moved off of Diggs, because I think Davante is clearly better than Diggs, and also because Diggs was a ticking time bomb, man. The relationship there was compromised. He had 1 year left on his deal. He wasn't going to come back. It just made sense to get off of him as a player at that time. Now you can bring in a better player who is going to be excited to be playing with an elite quarterback, is going to be optimistic, is going to bring that sort of new, enthusiastic energy. I think it'd be a healthier relationship. So yeah, I'd probably be willing to give up a second rounder because also the Bills have recouped some extra draft assets if you look at this coming year. I think it would put them over the top offensively, but it's not something that I think they need to do in the way that like the Jets do, because I think the Bills are an elite offense no matter what. And if they're thinking, hey, we don't want to commit to a contract of that size, I totally understand that thinking. To me, it's more about the contract than it is the draft capital, just because they're probably thinking we can just find solid receiving talent and Josh will elevate those guys. And there are certainly position groups that I'm more concerned about right now for the Bills than receiver. Like, if we look at the beatdown that we just saw to the Ravens, some people looked at receiver, and I thought the secondary outplayed the Bills' receivers in that first half, but I'm much more worried about what we saw defensively. A lot of that is health, down several key players, but just if I'm charting where I'm concerned with the Bills team, that's where it is. It's really not about the receiving core. I just think Davante's a great player, and I think he would help any team that is in that contending bubble and wants to put themselves over the top.
Yeah, I think the Bills actually makes a lot of sense too, and he gives you that top-notch superstar, and I don't think Diggs is that at this point in his career. And when you're thinking about nitty-gritty down playoff teams against great playoff teams, that would put the Bills over the top. Like, I think that would thrust them. I already have them, in my top 3 in the AFC. I mean, that might be enough to solidify them at, I don't know. I do like the Ravens a lot. It evens them up a little bit more with Baltimore, I think, in the weapons department, because I do think that Baltimore has more skill position talent than Buffalo. But I like that deal.
You think that would be the case if they added Davante Adams?
I still think it's Baltimore is. I like a lot of what Baltimore has, man. Zay, Derrick Henry, Isaiah Likely. I like a lot of what Baltimore.
Yeah, but if you stack that up against Davante and Kincaid and Shakir and James Cook with good depth,
Derrick Henry is the great equalizer, man. Derrick Henry is that great equalizer, but it gets them closer. I'll give you that. I don't hate that deal. When a second-round pick, I know we can get caught up. Like, we can get caught up with draft capital, and the NFL's a lot tougher because you have so many guys on a roster, right? Davante's a sure thing. Like, Davante's a sure asset at this point in his career, and he's under contract. I like that for Buffalo. My number one, though, still is New York for sure, though. I think the Jets, if they have an opportunity to do it, I would go ahead and I'd pull the trigger, man. I think that it's what they need. They need an infusion of offensive talent. Like, the Broncos may have shown you, like, the recipe to beating New York. If that pass rush can get home, sending that extra rusher, and there's nobody that can win early in a route and Rodgers trusts to get that ball out to, that could be a fatal flaw that kills New York. So if I'm the Jets, I'm go ahead and I'm ready to push my chips into the middle of the table and go and get Davante for Rodgers.
Completely agree. And I do think it'd be worth it for the Bills this year. I mean, I think it would make them the best offense in football, no doubt. I still think they have the potential to be that even without a clear number one receiver. The question is about the next few years, right? When you have to pay a Greg Rousseau, when you have to pay an AJ Epinesa, all of these young defensive players, James Cook, right? If you want to pay him like a decent sized running back contract, it's just, do we want to be expending damn near $30 million of our cap on a receiver when we know that we're going to have an elite passing attack and an elite offense even without one of those guys? It's complicated. I think it's much more clear cut for a team like New York, where I would just absolutely do it. And I think it would make them a much better football team. All right, Logan, this one comes to us from Jack. Which team that is exceeding expectations is most likely to come down to earth, and which team that is failing to meet expectations is most likely to get back on track? We had a couple people ask questions like this. Let's start with the first part, though, the team that is overachieving right now that you think will come back down to earth.
I'm going to take the Washington Commanders, and I know a lot of people are very excited about this team, as am I, and I don't think it's going to be the offense. I think the offense is going to keep kicking. Like, the offensive line is very good. Jaden Daniels is a stud quarterback. They've got a good running game. They've got good receiving talent. Like, the offense is not at all what I'm concerned about. It is this defense. I think this secondary is bad. I think it's one of the worst in the league. The linebacking group is better than it was last year. Like, they bring in Luvu. They bring in Bobby Wagner. He's obviously not what he was at one point, but he's still a good linebacker. And I like the pass rush. So this has really nothing to do with the front seven. I just think you see it against the Bengals. It's if you have a receiver that can just win one-on-one, that can burn a corner, the Washington secondary just doesn't have the personnel to keep up with elite number one receiving talent. And that's the fatal flaw to me. Washington has been able to keep pace with every team that they've played, and been able to just score points. And my issue is when a team does have that answer for Washington offensively, when they're able to limit this offense, get them off the field, force them into a few turnovers, I don't think the defense is going to be able to hold up their end of the bargain. So it just has to do with this secondary, and I still think the Cowboys and Eagles are more talented, and that's where I get a little bit worried about them keeping this pace. It's not the offense, and I think this team is going to be better than I expected preseason for sure. But I think this defense is going to let them down in a few big games. They haven't been good. They haven't been good at all. It's been this offense just outgunning and outdueling teams.
No, they didn't get stops at all until this week against Arizona. So I'm with you. When I look at the teams that are 3-1 or 4-0, there's two that pop out. The first one is the Commanders. Their offense has been unbelievable. They're averaging the most points per drive in football. It's 3.6 points per drive, and we're early in the season. But, just to put that number into context, 2013 Broncos averaged 2.8 points per drive. That's the best regular season offense ever. They averaged 37 points per game. Washington has been 25% more productive than that offense. It's insane what they're doing. But defensively, they're dead last in points allowed per drive. They're 28th in terms of yards per pass attempt allowed. They're 31st versus the run in terms of yards per attempt. They're dead last in third down defense. They're 27th in red zone defense. So for everything that they're doing at an awesome level offensively, they've been just as bad defensively. And considering how awful this defense was last year, I do think it's a little bit more likely that continues than this level of meteoric offensive production. And that does worry me against a Philly or a Dallas. Even though those teams are flawed defensively, clearly, they're just much more talented on that side of the ball. The good news for Washington is they have a pretty easy schedule. Their toughest non-division games remaining are Atlanta, New Orleans, and Pittsburgh. Those are all very winnable. They're not facing any elite teams outside their division, and there's some cupcake games in there. They have another game against the Giants, so they definitely have a path to the playoffs. I'm just really, really worried about their defense, and I do wonder if when they face some great defenses, because let's be honest, last couple weeks, they've faced two of the worst defenses in football. I think that the Bengals and the Cardinals are both disasters on that side of the ball. I worry about teams that can challenge the run game for them, control the screen game. I saw a remarkable stat the other day. I believe 76% of Washington's first down play calls are either runs or screens. So they've done an awesome job of getting it to second and manageable. They've been really good on third down in those third and short situations. But I just worry against a team that can, again, shut down the run game, get them behind the sticks, overpower that offensive line, because that's another thing. Jaden's been getting the ball out very quickly, getting to his first read a lot. I don't think that offensive line is actually very good. Then I worry just a bit. I think this is a good offense, no question. But again, can they dominate teams like they have been? I think that they're due for a little bit of regression back to earth. And I think that this is more like an average team overall that is just as bad defensively as they are good offensively. The other team, Logan, that I wrote down is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, sitting here at 3-1. God bless Baker Mayfield, your beloved boy. He's been doing his thing out there. It's just when I look within this division, I think Tampa Bay's defense is slightly above average. I think the offense is still very reliant on Baker. The offensive line, the run game haven't been very strong. And when I compare them to the Saints and the Falcons, it's just easy for me to see Tampa finishing third in this division because those other teams are stronger in the trenches. They run the ball much, much better. They put less on the shoulders of their quarterbacks, and then they also have talented defenses. I would say probably slightly more talented defenses. So it's just the sustainability of the formula. The Bucs have the best quarterback in this division. The question is just, does that margin exceed the margin in talent and in the ability to dictate the game in the trenches and set up play action and run the football that you get with New Orleans and Atlanta? I think I still slightly prefer those two teams, and so that's why it's a good 3-1 start for Tampa, but I think they probably still miss the playoffs.
I mean, I didn't even consider the Buccaneers for this question just because I haven't really been surprised by this start.
They're 3-1 though. That's kind of how I was looking at it. I was thinking if you're in that upper echelon in the standings through 4 weeks.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't disagree with you. I think that they are third for me in this division just in terms of recipe. Like, I don't know. I haven't been that surprised by Tampa. Maybe it's just that I believe in Baker Mayfield that much, but I haven't been that surprised by their hot start. But I do think they'll probably come back to earth. It is that burden on Baker Mayfield's shoulders. Like, I think Graham Barton, the center from Duke, I think that's a home run on the offensive line, but the rest of this offensive line is still very bad. I'm glad that they got Bucky Irving. I think they found somebody that can actually run between the tackles. I think Rashad White has been better, on stretch plays outside of the tackle, stuff like that. But Bucky hits the hole fast. He's just a harder runner. But I agree with you. I think that they're just not going to be able to reliably run the football. And Baker can win games where he is overtasked. That's something that has really impressed me with him. Because I was skeptical, right? I thought he'd have to have great weapons. He'd have to have a running game, and he hasn't. He is, he's played beyond this situation, but I think he'll come back to earth. The team that I think is most likely to get back on track is Philadelphia for me, a team in the same division. I just think they're too talented. And don't get me wrong, I don't even know if this team's going to win a playoff game. I could see Philadelphia collapsing in a very similar fashion to the way that they did last season with their red flags. Their quarterback, I don't trust Jalen Hurts at this point in his career. Like, he has fallen further for me than any other quarterback over the last season and a half. The defense still worries me. They are still prone to giving up boneheaded shot play after shot play that kill games for them. And I think Sirianni's a bum. I think Sirianni is emotionally volatile. I don't think he's a good play caller. He doesn't call plays. He's not responsible for the offense or the defense. To me, he's just like you said about Diggs, man, he's a ticking time bomb. Like, when is Sirianni just going to explode? I don't like guys like that as my head coach. I like guys like Tomlin. I was talking to one of my friends about this yesterday. I would rather just have a guy like Tomlin who is stone cold the entire game and emotionless, or a guy like Mike McDaniel that looks like he's stoned off his balls on the sideline, just like, with his mouth wide open. I don't like guys that are really excitable, and it's a difference, right? Like, McVay, when shit goes wrong, he'll get agitated, but he doesn't explode. But when the team scores, he'll get excited. I'm fine with you getting excited, but it's when stuff goes negative. I just think that negative feeling can permeate through to your players, and I don't think it's it's not a good vibe. I think Sirianni's a bad vibe. That's my take. So when I say back on track, I don't mean it in the sense that they're going to win a playoff game. I don't have super high expectations ceiling-wise for Philadelphia, but I do think they're still a playoff team. I think when A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith get healthy, this is a team that's going to rattle off some wins and get back into the playoff picture. So that's what I mean when I say back on track. I'm still skeptical about Philadelphia when it comes to absolute ceiling and Super Bowl expectations.
I'm with you. I still think that they're a playoff team. And obviously this past week, they're down their two best weapons in the receiving game. It's just the defenses where they embarrassed themselves, and the defenses where they've just been bad. I mean, they're 25th in points allowed per drive. They're 28th in yards per rush attempt allowed. They're 25th in net yards per pass attempt allowed. We keep waiting for this talented group to turn it around. And in 3 of 4 weeks, they've been rough this season. So I do think that they'll improve, but if I'm looking at the 2-2 teams, like, I think the Niners and the Ravens are the two that I'm like, yeah, they're elite football teams. I'm not worried about them even the slightest bit. The Cowboys, I still think, have talent similar to Philly. They're not as stacked, but I like them more at the quarterback position. I think that their defense had the potential to be good, but I put them in the same category with Philly right now as one of the most underachieving groups and just not a good defense at this moment. So I'm not super confident in either of those teams figuring it out and reaching contending ceilings. I am a little bit higher on Philly right now, though, just because they're more stacked overall. There's not really a 1-3 team that I see turning it around. The one team that I'll shout out who I like is the Cardinals, because they have the offensive punch. They're an elite rushing attack. They have the receiver talent. I really like the depth in that group. Kyler has been super efficient. He's playing like a top 10 quarterback. So all of that to me is great. It's just they're a bottom 5 defense, and their next 3 weeks are at the Niners, at Green Bay versus the Chargers. I worry a little bit about things slipping out of control for them. And by the way, that's just another factor in the Buccaneers conversation. They're obviously starting from a better place, but they're about to be tested, dude, because they go at Atlanta, at New Orleans, Baltimore, Atlanta, at Kansas City, Niners. That's it through the bye week. So I think we're going to find out a lot about this Buccaneers team. And they've already got 2 good wins on the resume. 3, honestly, because of how Washington has played, although they didn't look quite as good in week 1. I don't think that Jaden was as comfortable as he has become. But they're going to be tested. I think Arizona is very much going to be tested, and I just worry about their defense. So I think Philly's a good choice here because they're a 2-2 team that's looked rougher than the Niners or the Ravens, but that I do still think has the talent to bounce back. All right, this one from Aiden Williams, Logan. What could make the Vikings a Super Bowl contender this year?
All I need to see is continued elite play from Sam Darnold. I mean, I don't really need to be sold on anything else. I think this is a good offensive line. I think it's a balanced offensive attack. I think they've got all the skill position talent they need to be competitive. Justin Jefferson, Aaron Jones, Jordan Addison, Jalen Naylor. The receiving group is great. The running back I really believe in, and I think he's been a huge plus for a guy like Darnold just when he needs to hit a check down or hit somebody underneath. Aaron Jones is a phenomenal receiving back. This group still doesn't have TJ Hawkinson back. They go up another notch. The defense is a lot improved from last year. The additions of Cashman, of Renard, the secondary is depth. There's no holes on this team. They're very, very talented. They are exceptionally well coached. It's just Darnold. And I know people are really high on Darnold right now. The only thing I'll say is, again, we're through 4 weeks of football. There's a lot of football left to play. As long as they don't overburden him with expectations. And the comp I'm going to make here, I think, is a very, very good one.
Oh.
He's in that Jared Goff tier to me. And the reason I say that is it's no matter how much we praise the Detroit Lions or how high you want to be on Jared Goff after this last game. Because, again, I think a lot of box score watchers will go 100% completion percentage, 18 of 18, throws for damn near 300 yards. He pitches a perfect game. That's really rare. It's the only game a quarterback has ever had where he's perfect, attempting more than 15 passes in a game. It's one hell of a stat line. Carson, what is the formula for the Lions offense? The formula for the Lions offense is to limit Jared Goff's attempts. That's the secret recipe. That's the secret sauce. And that is very telling to me about Detroit and their Super Bowl expectations. The secret ingredient is don't let Jared Goff throw the ball. So in a lot of ways, I think that's the secret recipe for the Vikings. Don't let Sam Darnold throw the ball as much as he has to. And when we're talking about the elite quarterbacks of the elite, the greats of the great, when that is your secret ingredient, that's where I'm going to be skeptical about your Super Bowl expectations. And so it's all about Sam Darnold. I think the Vikings are going to be in the playoffs, whether they win this division or they're a wild card team. I lean more on thinking that Minnesota is going to be a wild card team, but with the lead that they have on this division, they could definitely win it. And so in a playoff setting, that is the ultimate gauge. That's what we're talking about when we come down to individual playoff games. Can Sam Darnold make all the throws that he needs to make to win them a playoff game? It's going to be on his shoulders. And I know that's a boring answer. It's going to come down to the quarterback, but in a lot of different ways, that's what it always comes back to. Think back to the Super Bowl when the Chiefs played the Niners. What was the difference maker? It was Brock Purdy needing to execute on an overtime drive. And I thought Brock Purdy played a good game. I thought Brock Purdy was great last year. I think he's been great to start this year. But when we were talking about Super Bowl contenders, which is this question, it is, can Sam Darnold make all the throws that he needs to win them a Super Bowl? That's where I'm still a little bit skeptical. I believe in this team. I believe in the coaching staff. I believe in the talent. Is Darnold going to be great when he needs to be great? That still needs to be proven to me. But he's had one hell of a start to this year, man. I think he's a top 3 MVP candidate right now, and I've been impressed. I thought Darnold was going to look bad in one of these games. He has not shown us. I mean, he had the second half against Green Bay wasn't great, but they had such a cushion that didn't even matter at that point. So,
yeah,
it's all about that boy Sam Darnold, man.
I'm with you. I think if they are a Super Bowl contender, as long as Darnold continues playing at this level, the one area specifically in which I think we will see him and this Vikings team tested is when they have to play from behind. And just by the nature of being in that sort of game, they do have to put a little bit more of it on Darnold's shoulders. The fact that they haven't had to do that through 4 weeks, playing some really strong opponents, is a testament to how great they are defensively and their ability to run the ball and be efficient in the passing game and build these leads and then hold on to them. Like, that's awesome. That is a testament to the strength of this team, but there is going to come a moment, it's just inevitable, where things don't go right early and maybe you make a costly mistake early and all of a sudden you're the one down 2 scores. Then that's where I become skeptical about a Jared Goff, just as I would a Sam Darnold being the guy who goes out there and wins you the game. But as I've said numerous times, I just don't think in the NFC there is an elite team that has an elite quarterback. Brock Purdy's playing some damn good football right now, man, and we got to give props to him. And the Niners are my favorite in the NFC. But when you look at the rest of the most talented teams, the Lions, Goff is a question. The Eagles, they have multiple questions, but Hurts is still one of them. So that's why Darnold isn't a disqualifier for the Vikings in those conversations. I do think that they're a Super Bowl contender as long as Darnold keeps playing like this and the defense keeps playing like this. Daniel Olson has another question on the Vikings, Logan. What will Minnesota do with JJ McCarthy if Darnold keeps playing like this or even close to this pace?
It's a good question, and my simple answer is you're just going to develop him through the rookie contract. The beauty of the fact that you drafted a rookie is that you don't have to pay the guy. You have full control of JJ McCarthy for 5 years if you accept both of his team options. So you don't really have to worry about this. Like, he can just learn from behind Sam Darnold until he needs to play. The issue becomes if Darnold struggles. If Darnold starts struggling at any point during this year, it's the eternal quarterback dilemma. You know, the backup quarterback is he's the favorite guy in town until he needs to come off the bench and actually start throwing passes. To me, if Darnold struggles at a point in this season or past this year, if they do give him a contract extension, it's all about when Sam Darnold starts playing poorly. And as you know, Carson, NFL fans are very reactive. Football moves exceptionally fast. It's not going to take a 8-week stretch of Darnold playing poorly. It's not going to take a year of Darnold playing poorly. It's going to be 2 weeks. It's going to be 3 weeks where Darnold has a couple of multi-interception, multi-turnover games where he costs them in a big way at the end of a game. It's not going to take a big sample. It'll be 2 or 3 weeks. Like, you think back last year with the Steelers, right? The Steelers lose 3 straight games, and everybody's like, oh, the sky is falling. The Steelers are obviously a unique situation when it comes to that because their formula is 1950s football, but the sentiment is still the same. 2 or 3 weeks of a skid, and that's when everybody starts panicking. That's when I worry about if fans are calling for McCarthy to come off the bench. But it's not going to be an issue if Sam Darnold is winning games and playing good football, and that's what I do love about this. There's no timeline. You don't have to rush J.J. McCarthy on the field. Sam Darnold looks good. McCarthy's on a cheap contract right now, so I don't really think you have to worry about this right now. I think this becomes an issue in year 2, in year 3 of the Darnold experiment if he hits a skid. Because you're not going to have to worry about this year because McCarthy's out for the entire season with an injury. So it's only a thing if Darnold struggles, in my opinion.
I think that this all really depends on what sort of contract you're looking at with Darnold, because Darnold's up after this year. You're not getting him back on another 1-year, $10 million deal or whatever it is. I'd be willing to give Darnold, based on what we've seen so far, like a 2-year, $40 to $50 million type deal.
I don't think that's enough. I don't think that's
mid-sized.
enough. I think he's going to ask for Baker-like type money.
Yeah, 3 years, like 80.
I'm just saying per year, I think he's probably looking closer to $30 million a year. I don't know if that would be enough.
I think that you're probably right. I mean, I think 20 would be a real steal. That's why I'm thinking 25. 30 is pushing it, but also it's like you would have zero on-field evidence from JJ McCarthy. And if your team keeps playing like this, and Darnold does keep playing like this, like, I don't think that you can punt on that window. So I would be willing to let that dollar value creep up. I just wouldn't want to let the contract length go for too long, because I think at some point, like, if JJ McCarthy does develop, as you hope he does, you can inject him into this offense. And I'm sorry, dude. Even though Darnold's numbers are great and he's playing well, like I just don't think he's an exceptional quarterback. I think he's a solid quarterback in a really good offensive situation. So if JJ McCarthy can get to the level where he could play like a solid starting quarterback and be in a great offensive situation, then I think you could keep that window open without having to invest too much in the quarterback position in terms of cap. I think you want at least 1 year of JJ on his rookie deal. I would not be giving Sam Darnold a 3-year, 4-year deal. I think it's 2 years. If it's $25 million, that's fine. If it's close to 30, okay, I think you can live with that to have a dude who keeps your window open in the short term. But I think if McCarthy's decent, he can make this team go. And we don't know what their roster will look like in 3 years, but I think that has to be the vision, right? I mean, you can do the Jordan Love experiment where it's we sit him, but before that rookie contract is up, we got to know. And actually, the Packers nailed it because they got Love on the short-term, mid-sized, really pretty small extension. I don't know if Minnesota could pull that off, but I think you got to see 1 year of McCarthy starting on his rookie deal. But until then, if Darnold does keep playing like this, I don't think there's pressure to just yank Darnold. Carson Williams asks, have any of your preseason award predictions changed? And what do you think is the best race early in the season?
It's a good question. Basically, all of my awards have changed if I had to do predictions at this point in the season, except for MVP. MVP to me is still Josh Allen. I think that... Real quick, I know that you guys are tired of us talking about Josh Allen and praising him.
Cook.
Dude, Carson, I don't know if anything bothers me as much as Josh Allen discourse after a Bills letdown game. It's just like everybody wants to burn the boats immediately after any Bills loss and write him off as a bum, as a scrub. And they just use like 1 week of evidence as Josh Allen is not in MVP conversations. Josh Allen's not better than Lamar. It's like they always just take one bad sample from the Bills and they use that to push the anti-Josh agenda.
And Logan, if you were ranking who was at fault for this Bills loss,
it's
where would Josh Allen be?
I mean, like, you got dug a massive hole immediately, and Derrick Henry ran for 200 yards. Like, and they did the same thing they're doing the same thing with Burrow. Like, look, man, I've cooled off on how high I am as Burrow and as elite QB, but, like, people go, oh, the Bengals are losing games, so it's got to be Joe Burrow's fault. No, he's got a horrible defense still.
Yeah.
Like,
did you see this segment after the Commanders game where our friend Shannon said that Burrow didn't do enough? It's like Joe Burrow basically played perfect football in that game. They missed a field goal. Outside of that, they scored on every drive. It's silly. It's silly, man. It's the single dumbest thing that we do as a collective sports world. We just misattribute wins and losses over and over and over again. Josh is a top 2 quarterback. He is, to me, still the long-term MVP frontrunner. Like, if we were to vote right now after 4 weeks, I'd honestly say it's Jaden Daniels. However, who do I think will sustain this elite level of play? Josh Allen.
I agree. And so that's the only award that I'm going to keep the same. Right now, my Offensive Player of the Year preseason, I took CeeDee Lamb. I definitely think that can still happen. I would take Nico Collins right now. I mean, he's just outpacing every other receiver on planet Earth. I think you could also go Derrick Henry with his dominance on the ground. I think you could make a case for Saquon Barkley. Yep. That, to me, is the most obviously, MVP is an intriguing race every year. I think Offensive Player of the Year is probably the most fascinating. Defensive Player of the Year preseason, I took TJ Watt. I'm going to take Aiden Hutchinson at this point in the season right now. He's there. Like, Aiden Hutchinson is already there and is an elite edge rusher, right, in the Watt, Garrett tier of guys, whoever else you want to put there. Hutchinson is all of that and more to me. He's got 6.5 sacks. He had that crazy one where he had 4.5 versus Baker, and he did that basically in like 2 quarters. It was ridiculous. And also the reason I would call an audible to that is traditionally with Defensive Player of the Year, they don't like doing repeats or they don't like giving it to the guy year after year. That's why I think you saw Garrett get it. I think it's why you finally saw TJ get one. That's why you saw Bosick. And I'm not saying these guys didn't earn them in individual years. The races with Defensive Player of the Year are always so close that they normally go with the new guy. And I think the next guy up is Aiden Hutchinson. And I don't mind that. Aiden Hutchinson is a monster. So I would do that. Offensive Rookie of the Year, at this point, it's a no-brainer. It's Jaden Daniels. I don't think I have to add too much to that. Defensive Rookie of the Year, I would change too. Preseason, I picked Dallas Turner of the Vikings. Right now, I would give it to Jared Verse for the Rams or Latu for the Colts. Both of those guys are starting on the D-line for both of those teams. They're really impactful. They both have a sack and a forced fumble. Versus pressure rate is ridiculous right now. I also think it's important he's also a good run stopper too, but I think it's important to contextualize the Rams. The reason that number is so high is because they've by far taken on the least opponent pass rushing snaps. So there's just a smaller sample size for Verse. That's why his pressure rate is so much higher right now. So I picked Dallas Turner preseason. I would go Verse or Latu. And then Coach of the Year, I picked Dan Campbell. I would take Kevin O'Connell right now. And Comeback Player of the Year, I took Rodgers. I would take Sam Darnold right now. So the only award race that I am sticking with is Josh Allen. Every other award, basically at this point in the season, I would call an audible on.
Yeah, I basically agree with you. I would stick with Josh for MVP. Offensive Player of the Year, I took Jettis. I think that is very interesting right now. Nico's a good choice. I still think Jettis is very much in the mix. 4 weeks in, he doesn't necessarily have the insane production, but I mean, he's still got elite production. I think at this moment it would probably be Derrick Henry just because of how ridiculously unstoppable he's helped make that Ravens run game. He's got the most production. He's got the most touchdowns. His yards per carry is at 6. Saquon's close. I think Henry has probably been slightly more dominant. I'd lean him. By the way, I think Malik Neighbors, just when you consider the offensive situation and his production, he's at least on the outskirts of this conversation. I'm with you on Hutchinson. I think he has to be depoy right now. I picked Micah in the preseason. He has 8 more pressures than anybody else on top of having the most sacks. Really been pretty dominant. Offensive Rookie of the Year, I picked Caleb. It has to be Jalen right now. Defensive Rookie of the Year, I picked Byron Murphy. I'd probably go with Kamari Lassiter right now. I think that he's been pretty awesome in coverage. He has a passer rating of 42 when targeted. He's been very clean. He's only committed 1 penalty, and it was illegal contact for 5 yards. So I do think that he's playing opposite a really good corner in Derek Stingley, but he's been out there for every single snap. For a rookie second rounder, I think that he's been pretty outstanding, but Verse is definitely a good pick as well. Those are the two who I would debate. Coach of the Year, I took Campbell. Like you, I would go KOC right now. I think he just continues to cement himself as an elite offensive mind. Damn good football coach. Comeback Player of the Year, I do think it's got to be Darnold. I mean, I was thinking Rodgers has held up his end of the bargain, right? He's come back and he's played pretty well. This past week was rough, but all offense was rough in that game. But Darnold, that's a compelling story, man. You see a dude who was a top 3 pick in the draft and never found success and all of a sudden is in MVP conversations right now. That's tough to beat, even if you are a 40-year-old who tore his Achilles and found himself through an ayahuasca trip. You know, I think Sammy D's got him beat.
Yeah, and honestly, last year's Comeback Player of the Year race kind of taught me about what I think people who vote on this are going to vote on. And it's more performance than anything because I thought DeMar Hamlin was like the biggest lock of all time to be comeback player because the guy died on the field and came back. But the fact that they gave it to Joe Flacco to me says we're gonna lean on the guy who played better football. And so Darnold's. And I think Rodgers' story is more compelling, but Darnold's playing better ball.
Well, but I also think the Geno Smith story would be the closest equivalent we have to Darnold, right? Just that complete resurgence. Or Baker. Not about injury, fair. But I think Geno and Darnold are more extreme because Baker's always been a starter. And Baker's had multiple quality seasons as a starter. Like, Geno was given
Well, it's funny that people say that now because that's not how people were talking about Baker before he went to Tampa Bay.
Dude, but it's different. Now, I'm with you. I was low on Baker, but it's still different, right? The 2020 season Baker.
I'm just saying people are going to now say that he
Geno were viewed as bums their entire careers.
I completely agree, but we're not going to act like Baker wasn't considered a bum by 90% of NFL media coming into last year. I just want, like now that Baker has had a year and some change of quality play, the way people were talking about Baker coming into last year was ridiculous to me. But now we're saying he had quality seasons. I just think it's funny.
Well, because he did. He did. I'm not saying that Baker didn't have a great resurgence, but to compare it to Geno and Darnold, who have never sniffed a decent season as a starter before they have these resurgences when, you know, they're pushing 30 years old, it's just different. Like, it's completely shocking in a way that Baker isn't, because we've seen Baker do it before. He's balling out, but like, this is a dude who's played Pro Bowl caliber football before versus Sam Darnold.
It's nice to hear you say that, man. It's nice to hear you say that, man.
Dude, Baker's balling, and listen, I underestimated him. There's no doubt. But I think if you just look at it overall, like Geno, Darnold, doing stuff like this, it's more surprising than Baker doing it. Okay, we did have one little question on awards as well from our pal Caleb, NBA Facts on TikTok. He asked, what does Caleb Williams have to do to win Offensive Rookie of the Year at this point?
Damn, man, I don't know if he can.
Yeah, be Superman.
The situation is just so much worse for Caleb in Chicago. I think the route, I think Jaden Daniels would have to have a catastrophic fall off, and I think this offense is too clever. I think he's too efficient, and I think he's so pro ready. It's hard for me imagining him having a catastrophically bad rest of his season. And then I think Caleb can play better. Obviously, I think he can play way better than we've seen through 4 weeks, but I don't think his offensive situation is ever going to be. I don't think it's going to be good enough this season for him to get into these conversations. And there's two components that really hold him back. I think the receiving talent is all there. Keenan Allen, Odunze, DJ Moore, Kmet. I believe in all that. Offensive line is bottom 5. The running game is bottom 5. And Shane Waldron's an idiot. I just think Shane Waldron sucks at his job. I saw a stat with JSN, his route chart last year versus this year with and without Waldron and how much better he's been. Dude, Geno Smith got Waldron that job. Geno Smith made Waldron look like a competent offensive coordinator. I think he's a bad play caller, in terms of what he's calling at certain points of the game. I also think he's a not creative play designer. I don't think he knows how to draw guys open. And so, yeah, I think those are just two fundamental limiters. Caleb can play as well as he can, but I think he's so limited by his offensive coordinator and his offensive line. It's going to be really damn hard. And I just think it would have him playing mistake-free football and the Bears getting into the playoffs and the Commanders missing the playoffs. And even that, I think it would be a misattribution. We talk about the misattribution error with quarterbacks and wins and losses. I think it would probably be a mistake even if that. If the Bears had more team success than the Commanders, that wouldn't be enough to move me if Jaden outplayed Caleb. So, I don't know. I think it's I think it's an insurmountable mountain, man. I don't know if Caleb can play that well considering his circumstances.
It'd be really hard because it's not just that Jaden has outplayed him in a vacuum, which he unquestionably has. It is, as you mentioned, the situation. And it's just the ability organizationally to make life easier on your rookie quarterback. Jaden has done some special stuff, but as we talked about, they've set him up with a strong run game. On early downs, they're setting him up to work with second and manageable, right? They're allowing him to immediately adapt an offense that's conducive to his play style and isn't super hard for him to pick up on and take some of the pressure off him to play hero ball at all times. The Bears have done none of that for Caleb Williams. So just as a matter of that, I don't see how he matches the efficiency of Jaden. I don't see how the Bears can compete with the Commanders as a team offense. I think it would be really tough. I think Caleb will continue to play better. I think he already is. I think you could make it more of a conversation, but overcoming the gap considering the situations and really the coaching as much as anything, I think would be pretty tough. Logan, you mentioned Shane Waldron, and he does look like a buffoon, but you mentioned his Seattle Seahawks, or formerly his Seattle Seahawks. Pixel asks, how much do you believe in the Seahawks defense, if at all, and is Geno a top 8 quarterback?
I believe in this defense a lot more than last year. I think the pass rush has improved. I love the secondary. I think Devin Witherspoon is one of the top cornerbacks in the NFL, all things considered. The coverage ability and how hard he plays, there's just guys that have the mentality of a football player that play nasty. And I don't know if you saw it, the David Montgomery truck the other night. First of all, wow. I mean, the ability for Montgomery to take that lick and, not move an inch. Yeah. But I want to give credit to Witherspoon because that is an unstoppable force meeting an immovable object. And, I mean, Witherspoon came with such heat, man. He hit him so hard. Witherspoon plays like that every play. He's an elite tackler.
And then he was in the vicinity on
get
the other side of the field to make the
Yeah,
tackle.
bro.
He didn't make the tackle, but he was right there.
He got his ass up. It's not it's not how hard you get hit. It's how quick you get up, man. Witherspoon's a football player. I love him. He should have won Defensive Rookie of the Year to me last year, but he's one of the best corners in the game. So, and just that Mike McDonald is brilliant as a defensive mind. So I do believe in them more than last year. I do still think they have a fundamental flaw, and that's I don't think they can stop the run. That's not a Mike McDonald issue. That's a personnel issue, in my opinion. I think they need a big boy in the middle to eat up blocks. But they're moving along. I believe in them a lot more than last year, and that's a reason why I'm a little more confident in the Seahawks overall than I was before the season began. They're not a real deal contender to me, but they are a wild card contender where I think they could steal a playoff win from a team. On the Geno point, I talk about Hurts falling further than any other quarterback. There's no quarterback that has earned more stock with me than Geno, and I have a fluid list that I keep on my phone of all the quarterbacks because I just think about it way more than the average human being, an unhealthy amount. And guys move week to week for me. The one that I struggled the most with, Carson, was Geno versus Brock. And I tweeted this list out earlier today because I was bored and I played it on Bladen.com. Geno's 11-13 for me. And the two guys that I think he is neck and neck with that I struggle with more than anybody else is Brock at 12 and Aaron Rodgers at 11. I have Geno at 13 right now. And one of my friends, because I did the list with him, shout out Donnie. Me and Donnie did this list yesterday. Donnie took Geno over Dak Prescott. He took Geno over Rodgers. He took Geno over Purdy. So he's got Geno as a top 10 guy. Geno's right on that fringe top 10 for me. He's 13 right now, but I'm not mad at you, man. If you had Geno over Rodgers, if you had Geno over Purdy, I understand. Geno is one hell of a play extender. He's got wheels. He's got a cannon of an arm. He's super accurate. And he makes this offense go. He's their offensive engine. So I don't mind if you have Geno as a top 10 guy. Top 8's a little bit of a stretch for me. That's where you're getting a little squirrely, where you're putting him over. You're probably putting him over Jordan Love. You're probably putting him over Kyler Murray. That's where I draw the line. But I'd hear you out. I would wholeheartedly hear you out for a Geno conversation, man. And so it's close. It's certainly close. He's 13, but top 8 isn't a ridiculous range for Geno. I would hear you out if you wanted to argue that.
Top 8 is really hard, though. I'll just give you the 8 names who I think are pretty damn clear-cut. Mahomes, Allen, Lamar, Herbert, Burrow, Stafford, Dak, Stroud. I know that there are Dak haters. Man, he is just such an elite pocket processor, such an elite pocket passer. It's tough for me to argue Geno against him. Anybody else, though, if you want to argue him against Kyler, if you want to argue him against Jordan Love, Rodgers, Purdy, the dudes you mentioned in that range, absolutely you can. I do think there's an argument that he's in the 10 spot. I would take Kyler over him because the dual threat aspect is so insane, but Rodgers is still an elite processor, elite accuracy, just such a great football mind, but obviously has lost a lot athletically. Purdy just doesn't have the arm talent that Geno does. I mean, Geno can just rip some throws that Brock quite can't, and Brock is definitely a gifted play extender and improviser. I do think that you have a little bit more risk of turnover with him. I think those two are pretty darn close. Love, I would say last year down the stretch, clearly outplayed Geno. So I think for now, Love still has that 10 spot for me, just because we've only seen 2 weeks of him this year. But if he doesn't sustain that level, then it's definitely up there for grabs. So I love Geno. I've been an advocate of Geno's. I think he's awesome, and I think that he makes this team, along with their receiving talent, a good offense because the line is horrible. Defensively, I think they're solid. I think with a healthy secondary and a healthy D-line, there's a lot of talent there. Of course, the secondary we know is stacked, but I also think the defensive line has really improved. I think Boye Mafe is really good. Leonard Williams, obviously, having a full season of him, I think he can be a game changer up front. We'll see how Byron Murphy progresses throughout the year. Like, I'm with you. We need to see that they can stop the run against a legitimately good rushing attack. But there's just nothing that I would take away from their defensive front, at least from this past week against the Lions, when they are literally trotting out a second-string defensive front and damn near a second-string defense. So I would say I expect this to be a slightly above average Seattle defense, and I expect it to be an above average offense. Like, I think they're just a good all around football team. I don't think they're elite on either side of the ball, but I think they're a playoff team. I think they're a wild card team. Maybe they win a playoff game. If Geno balls out, he has that sort of upside. TD, Tutty, taking it to the house, in for 6. Whatever you call a touchdown, one thing's for sure. Touchdowns matter more at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL.
On the ground, in the air, from the special teams or the defense, we don't care how they score them. We want to bet on touchdowns, and DraftKings Sportsbook is delivering. Ready to place your first bet? Try betting on something simple, like picking a player to score a touchdown or how many TDs will be in a game. Go to the DraftKings Sportsbook app and make your pick.
Ready to do a touchdown dance of your own? New DraftKings customers bet $5 to get $200 in bonus bets instantly. Score big with DraftKings Sportsbook, the #1 place to bet touchdowns. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code NERDS. That's code NERDS for new customers to get $200 in bonus bets when you bet just $5. Only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. Okay, White Morpheus asks, should Mike McDaniel be fired?
No, I mean, I think Mike McDaniel's brilliant. I think when you look at the guys that come from that Shanahan tree are masterminds, and I still believe that Mike McDaniel is all that he was hyped up to be. I get he's weird and goofy and quirky, and every time you look at him on the sideline, he's slack-jawed, staring off into space. Like, Mike McDaniel really does look like he just ripped the hell out of a pen, man, and is trying to formulate his thoughts. At the podium, too, just... I kind of like it. I think Mike McDaniel just cracks me up by existing. He's just a naturally, funny guy. Personality aside, and I get it, man. I know the Dolphins are reeling right now. The vibe on the sideline is horrible. The team looks absolutely frustrated. They're spiraling without Tua. And I do think you've seen the value of Tua in his absence, right, of being able to just run this offense at a high level. But it's not a Mike McDaniel issue to me. They've got all the skill position talent. The schemes are still smart. To me, the issue is they could run the ball last year because of all the moving pieces in the pre-snap motion and all the disguising and stuff. Because this offensive line has never been good. The offensive line is still not good. I think they can't get push up front. The reason they were able to run the ball last year was the threat of the passing attack just opened up so much and all the pre-snap motion. And I think you're seeing the regression of both sides of the ball because of the lack of Tua. The offense is just more predictable. They can load the box up. And Tyler Huntley is not striking fear into any defense, right? You're just not as afraid of him through the air. So you can counteract. You can play the run more heavily. And there's just no one to run the offense. Mike McDaniel, to me, is brilliant. I think if Tua comes back and you see this team struggle to win a playoff game, next year or something like that, I think it's a real conversation because in a lot of ways, I think with what you're seeing with Cliff Kingsbury in Washington, sometimes it is better to have the brilliant offensive mind just run your offense. And that's where I think maybe we'll have a conversation if you worry about him running a team and running a locker room. And to me, there hasn't been enough of a sample, though. Mike McDaniel's been great when Tua's been out there, and that isn't enough for me to write him off. But it'll be a conversation next year, I think, if the Dolphins are bad with Tua or with another guy at the helm for a full season. But I would still value having Mike McDaniel in-house because I do believe him in that much as an offensive, mind. Like, when we're talking about the best of the best in the league today, it's still Shanahan to me. It's still McVay. I'm just looking at head coaches to be clearer, too, because obviously Ben Johnson would be up there, Bobby Slowick. But just looking at head coaches, I think Brian Callahan is on that short list. I think he's brilliant. But Mike McDaniel's still top 3. I think it's McVay, I think it's Shanahan, and I think it's McDaniel. And then we can talk about everybody else.
What about Reed and LaFleur?
I forgot about LaFleur. LaFleur I would have up there.
Don't call Andy
he's top
Reid
5
washed because of the first 4 weeks of the regular season.
McDaniel's top 5 though, which is what I'm saying, and that to me still trumps anything else you have negative to say about McDaniel.
Yeah, he's not the problem here to me. If we are dishing out responsibility and assigning blame to Mike McDaniel, I think it's just for generally overestimating Tua in 2 ways. Number one, saying that this is a guy we should pay $50 million a year. And of course, he's not the GM, but he's the head coach of the football team. And he has been a huge, huge Tua advocate. And also, and this is a collective McDaniel and front office thing, for not addressing the backup quarterback situation, just because I think that's what they've greatly mismanaged. I legitimately think if they had a capable backup quarterback, and there are several of those dudes out there, you see it. Mason Rudolph steps in. Andy Dalton steps in. Tyrod Taylor steps in. Carson Wentz hasn't stepped in. But, like, there are dudes who could make this a functional offense who you could have traded a late-round pick for, who you could have signed. We'll talk about that in a second for Miami. And they just haven't, and they put themselves in a situation where they legitimately have incompetent quarterback play. I still think he's a great offensive coach. I'm with you. Some of the most creative use of motion that we've ever seen. I think just his offensive vision in Miami acquiring as much speed as possible. Like, the dude is like a video game offensive coach. The production that he was able to squeeze out of this group last year, a talented group, but nonetheless, was absurd. I think that he was huge, along with, of course, adding Tyreek and Jalen Waddle and getting the most out of Tua. So I am definitely far from bailing on Mike McDaniel, and I think the players liked him. I mean, everything last year, at least when things were going well, indicated Tua certainly loved him. Like, I get that he's a bit of a weird guy, but I think that it works. I think he believes very deeply in his players, and I think he's a very smart offensive coach. It's just the quarterback play is disastrous for them. That is the problem for Miami. But yeah, I do think there are dudes who have schemes that are a bit more malleable. You know, like you look at what a LaFleur could do with Malik Willis out there. Just an unbelievable job of adjusting to his skill set. LaFleur offenses are always going to run the ball extremely well. Like, props to him for that. I do think that that puts him above a McDaniel, but again, we're talking about these high-tier conversations. Logan, as I mentioned, there is the question of what the Dolphins are going to do at quarterback. Thoughts on potential trades for the Dolphins to fix their quarterback situation mid-season?
I've got trades and I've got a couple of free agents that I want to shout out. The unattainable backups to me, guys that I don't think they could go out and get, like, as people would say, Joe Flacco. The Colts and Anthony Richardson's injury history, as you mentioned. This is a big fault of Miami's. I'm glad you brought that up on a couple of our shows, but it's an important point. The Colts knew that Anthony Richardson was injury prone after his rookie season, and they said, we need a guy who is a stabilizer. So they went out and got Joe Flacco. Genius. The Panthers maybe didn't know what they had in Bryce Young. They bring back Andy Dalton. So I think those guys are unattainable just because I think those teams value those guys way too much. You couldn't give them up anything because that's going to deflate the roster. I don't think the Jets would be willing to give up Tyrod Taylor. I think Rodgers and his injury history, I think they probably value him too much, just having a guy who can win you a football game in a pinch. And I think the Chiefs wouldn't be willing to part with Carson Wentz just because I think he's a good backup. Maybe he's probably the most attainable out of the backups. But the guys I think you maybe could trade for, Josh Dobbs in San Francisco, I would be willing to make a move for, giving up a 5th or a 6th round pick to potentially save the season. Jimmy Garoppolo, I think in L.A. Look, I have my issues with Jimmy G. I don't think Jimmy G's a good quarterback, but can he make throws on time? And we saw it in San Francisco. I mean, Mike McDaniel was there, right? Like, we saw it in San Francisco. You bring in a guy who can just not screw it up. And Jimmy G's pretty turnover prone for a guy who is a game manager, but he can win you football games. And the Rams, I think, would be more willing to part with Jimmy because they still have Stetson Bennett. And Stetson Bennett is some sort of stud, but he's a guy who I think can operate your offense. And then two bottom-tier white guys, Drew Lock and Sam Howell, I think are probably the next two guys that I look at. I look at them in a different tier from Dobbs and Jimmy G just because I think Locke and Howell are a little more reckless with the football. But they've got arm talent. They've got some mobility. They're just more talented than the guys that the Dolphins have in-house right now. And again, when you're looking at the season on the brink of disaster, those are guys that I would be willing to make moves for. And then some free agents I'll shout out. Ryan Tannehill, no-brainer. Played in Miami before, free agent. Not mobile, but he's an older guy who has a brain, right? I still look at Flacco and Dalton as more valuable guys, but he's been there before. He's not going to get rattled. He's played in Miami. And the last guy, you know this is my guy, Carson. I always shout him out. AJ McCarron. I think AJ McCarron can still play ball. The guy's been balling in the UF or whatever XFL, whatever league it is, man. He's been balling out there for years now, and he has turned down an opportunity to come back to the NFL multiple times because he wanted to be a starter in those leagues.
So ballsy.
I still think McCarron can win football games at a level. He's probably like the least intriguing one, but hey, Tyler Huntley's not winning you football games, man. No. Skylar Thompson is not winning you football games. I think all of these guys that I've named give you a better chance to win a football game nowadays.
I agree. I kind of think they might have missed their window to make a trade, though, because Tua's apparently targeting a Week 8 return. So, like, if you were going to make a trade, which they probably never were because they were expecting a Tua return, you had to be on it like that. Otherwise, you're like, hold on, why did we give up this draft capital? Because realistically, the season's lost for Miami. I don't think that they're coming back and salvaging this. And there's a big lesson in that, man, which is the backup quarterback position matters, especially with an injury-prone quarterback. I mean, think about what Jake Browning did for the Bengals last year, right? That offense was statistically more productive with him. They were a 500 team with him. Like, just have a dude who can float the ship on the roster.
And not to cut you off, Carson, something you mentioned earlier this year with Miami, the reason that Browning was so successful in that offensive system is because he had been with the organization for multiple years. And so, inadvertently, the Bengals were planning for this. Like, it's like when Mason Rudolph stepped in for the Steelers last year. He had been with the organization so long, he knew how to operate the offensive system when it came time. The Dolphins haven't even had a guy in the wings. Well, it was Skylar Thompson. Skylar Thompson's just not that guy. Right. You need to have it's really beneficial to have a guy that has known the offensive system for a few seasons, so when you plug him in, he's not overwhelmed by the situation.
And Skylar Thompson has been there, but Skylar Thompson just sucks, dude. Like, I don't know why he would be your plan A in terms of backups. So I do think it's looking at free agency. I think Tannehill is the obvious choice. Apparently, he wants to go somewhere that he'd play the full year. This is the reporting. He wants to be a full season starter. I think that's kind of crazy if you're Ryan Tannehill, but I guess he's got all the money he needs. He's probably thinking, if it's not for the big show, I'll just sit here on my couch. But there's no risk involved in that. I think he's clearly the best free agent quarterback available. I think when you consider the skill set, which is just, can you throw accurately on time? Like, I think that Tannehill is fine at that. He's a very limited athlete. He's never had a live arm, but that's not what you need in this offense. You just need a dude who can read things pretty quickly and get the ball to your special playmakers. And their backups, their starters now are just so bad that they can't even do that. But that to me is the one, man. If you can sweet talk Ryan Tannehill into it for a few weeks, then you become a capable football team. Because with Tyler Huntley out there or Skylar Thompson, you're just not. All right, Logan, D-Ray asks, which rookie has taken you by surprise the most?
For me, I think it's got to be Jaden Daniels. Like, not to beat a dead horse, but the guy is just so far along already as a rookie. He's taken the position like a fish to water. I thought he may struggle because I questioned his ability to read the field. I thought that he may be too small in terms of his frame, taking these big hits from these defensive linemen. He just has. I mean, Jaden has been perfect through 4 weeks. I'm stunned that he is so far along already, and I'm a little disappointed in myself. Like, I think I undervalued his speed a little bit. He's one of the best rushing talents we've ever seen at the position. And just talking about individual skill sets like Cam Newton, RG3, Lamar Jackson, Michael Vick, Jaden Daniels is in that tier of special rushing threats. And he's so skilled, he's so talented, he's so poised already. I think he has to be the answer here.
Oh, Jaden's the obvious answer. So I'll go anywhere else. I'll shout out some other dudes. Malik Neighbors, obviously of super highly regarded talent. Just the fact that he's already playing like a fringe top 5 receiver, playing like a top 10 receiver, that's outstanding. We mentioned him earlier, but Bucky Irving, I think. There's always the one mid to late round running back who just immediately produces. Even undrafted guys, like, we know that this is the easiest position to get immediate production from unheralded talents. However, just the efficiency that we've seen from him, I mean, he's up at almost 6 yards per attempt compared to what we've seen from Rachaad White, who I've always thought is a talented guy, not a bell cow back in the NFL. I never expected that from him, and he's really struggled to be efficient in that role, but an awesome dude in space, great receiving back. Like, his efficiency's been brutal. Bucky's been very good there already. And then the last dude I'll shout out, We already mentioned briefly, but it's Kamari Lassiter. I just think he has been really, really stellar for the Texans defense. And this is a draft that didn't have a bunch of highly regarded defensive players in the scope of a normal class. As we've talked about, it's the longest that we've ever seen a draft go without a defensive player being picked. But this is an early second round dude, mid-second round dude. He's been really good. All right, we have another question from Daniel Olson, Logan, because I really like this one. I'm very interested in your answer. Which position has the biggest gap between the best player and the second best?
I wrote down 4 names. I wanna get your gauge on.
Okay.
I was thinking about we could do like a little mini draft here, like a draft like who you think. I think my first pick is gonna. I think my first pick is gonna be Trent Williams at left tackle. I think that there's a lot of great tackles in the league today, but Trent has been so great for so long. And he's just stamped. Like, I mean, he has been unquestionably like the best left tackle in football for a while now. I mean, he was great when he entered the league in 2010 with the Redskins, but since he hit his prime, like, in my opinion, he's been the best left tackle in football, and it's been unquestioned. Yeah. But there is another guy that I thought about taking. I'm wondering who you're going to take with your first pick.
I thought about Trent. I do think he's a very good call. I think that Panay pushes him now. I think that Wirfs.
Panay's a beast. Panay is a beast.
He's a monster. Darrisaw's been great. Mailata's awesome. But I think it's really Panay who gives him the best run for his money. My choice was Chris Jones. I think it's actually decently
that's
clear.
A good pick. That's a good pick.
I think that in a post-Aaron Donald world, I mean, there's just nobody who touches him. There is not a comparable pass rusher at the position. Since the start of 2022, he has 10 more sacks than any other defensive tackle. He led the position in both double team rate and win rate last year. Actually, I think Donald was higher in win rate, but he's gone now. He doesn't count. So among dudes who are still playing football, he led in both. And he just has unmatched versatility, like the agility at his size, at his height, his ability to play both inside and outside, batting down balls at the line. Like, he's just such a monster, but it's really that pass rushing. He just has a completely different level of pop as a pass rusher than anybody else. So that was my choice. Who were the other names who you were considering?
I thought about taking Brandon Aubrey number 1. I'm not even going to lie to you.
Oh, like, that's the right take. That's the right take. My special teams bias didn't consider him.
Dude, I think he's so clearly the best kicker in the league. But the reason that makes it close is because there are other guys that I like a lot, like Fairbairn, Younghoe Koo, Boswell. But Aubrey to me is the best. And
that's the right take.
I thought about him. I also think just because of positional value, and I don't think kicker is like the most valuable position. The other guy I really considered was Fred Warner, and I think Fred Warner is probably on the short list of guys. I can't think of and maybe there's a guy that's like slipping my mind right now, but I do think that Fred Warner is like unquestionably the best middle linebacker in football.
No, I think that's a good call as well.
Maybe Roquan or like Patrick Queen, but those were
I think that those were the two.
Trent, Warner, Jones, and Aubrey were the first 4 guys that came to mind.
I think it's Brandon Aubrey, dude. I think that you cooked with that. I mean, he is unbelievable in terms of the range and efficiency. Like, he's just a completely different weapon than we've ever seen in the sport, bro. He is 16 of 17 from 50 plus. And I don't know how many of those are 60 plus, but it's multiple. I mean, we saw him bang the 65-yarder, obviously. I think that he's the one. I think he's the best kicker that we've ever seen. He's must-see TV, dude. Every time that they trot him out there, I lock in 100%. I do think that Fred Warner is pretty close, though. I think that those are all good names to shout out. I don't know if some people might think Mahomes. I don't think it's Mahomes right now with the level Josh is playing at.
That gap's not that big. I mean, it's just not.
I'm with you. All right, I think that these are good positions. I would move from Chris Jones to Brandon Aubrey. I think he's damn near in a different tier. I mean, and there's studs. Younghoe Koo is playing out of his mind. Fairbairn has been nails. Rare Dicker missed this past week, but he's pretty great. But Aubrey's just ridiculous, bro. They almost attempted a 71-yarder with him. They didn't, but they almost did. They considered it. What a freak. If you get past the 50, bro, I think you're getting points when you have Brandon Aubrey on your team. That's insane. Okay, White Sucks asks Logan, for the bottom 5 starters in the league right now, and I presume that he's talking quarterbacks, who would that be for you? Oh, you were thinking just 5 worst starting football players?
Yeah, I did write down some names. I want to hear that list. Okay, my first pick in this would be Tyler Bass.
Damn. The only one I have to push back on, I think Narveson is actually the worst kicker in football.
Narveson is
more of a
bad.
Sample, but he was brutal this past week.
That's true. I don't know. Tyler Bass has a track record, though.
Yeah,
I would take
he does.
Deshaun Watson. Deshaun Watson would be on my short list of worst starters in the league. The Titans right tackle, Nicholas Petit-Frere or whatever, I don't know, man. After that rep where he got put on all fours, I don't know how you come back. That's an all-time low light, bro. Like, to have your quarterback taking a hit and you're sitting there like you're about to hike the football, I don't think you can come back from that one. I wrote down Gabe Davis for the Jags. I don't think Gabe Davis is good. And I wrote down Zamir White. I don't think Zamir White is actually that bad, but I think it's a component of him being behind this line, but he's not produced. I think number 1 would either be it'd probably be Deshaun or Tyler Bass for me, but is there anybody else that's not a – we can get into quarterbacks, but is there anybody else that comes to mind for you with this?
That's some excellent hating, dude. But at the same time, it's like, as much as I may dislike Gabe Davis, he's not one of the 5 worst starting players in football at all positions. I don't know. I'd probably have to really think. I mean, I think that there's definitely some linemen who don't pop to the top of your mind, but who are definitely deserving of mentions in this conversation.
And I mean, quarterback definitely is the more interesting position to look at because everybody knows those games.
Yeah. Oh, well, you know what, actually, you know who I do think belongs here, although he might not be starting anymore, but Zeke.
Zeke would have been my number 1 pick, but I think Dowdle is technically the starter.
Yeah, that's fair. Zeke was week 1 starter, though. My God.
So, if we're doing a QB, let's do a little bit of rapid-fire draft here, Carson. I'm going to take Deshaun Watson number 1.
All right. I'll take Bo Nix.
That's a good pick.
I like how we just turned this into a draft.
All right, I'm going to go off my list. Bo Nix is the right pick, I think. Is Bryce a technical starter,
no.
or should we?
No.
Okay.
Bryce is not starting anymore.
Damn. I'll take Jacoby Brissett.
I agree. I think that Brissett is the next pick. I mean, there's 2 dudes left. Well, there's 3 dudes maybe in the conversation for this year, but there's really 2 dudes left. I'm going to take Will Levis.
It's a good pick. I'll take Daniel Jones.
I thought you were going to go Gardner. I think Gardner's...
I like Gardner too much. I like Gardner too much, man.
Just because he's quirked up. I don't know. That's pretty close. I also think, just for this year, Anthony Richardson might be in these conversations just because he's still so inaccurate. But there's definitely an explosiveness with him that none of these dudes can touch.
For sure.
It's hilarious like how high his yards per attempt are while his completion percentage is so low. He's averaging 8.5 yards per attempt, which is elite, with a completion percentage of 50, which is obviously awful. But he's one of the best rushing threats. So I think he's just clear. He's too talented compared to these
Anthony Richardson's like one of those power hitting first baseman that either hits a bomb or strikes out, man, every time at the plate.
Yeah. Good take. You would take Danny Dimes over Gardner? Yeah. I mean, I think I was on your side in that preseason. God, this is not a mid-off. This is a shit-off if we're comparing these 2.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, listen, it was your pick. We made it a draft. You took Danny Dimes. It was going to be tough to do a bottom 5 quarterbacks list without Logan Camden bringing up Danny Dimes.
Got to.
All right. This question I really like. This is from Azazel. How high on the all-time quarterback rankings would you guys have Lamar Jackson? I think he's getting to the point where his career is long enough that we can start having those kinds of discussions.
I think it might be pronounced Azazel, but I'm not 100% sure.
Well, apologies if I mispronounced.
I think you could debate Lamar being a top 10 QB of all time, and I do think this is interesting because I tweeted out a while back about my top 10 QB peaks, and that's how I like to look at it. Lamar's already a 2-time MVP, the only quarterbacks to win multiple MVPs in their career, Peyton Manning, Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady, Brett Favre, and Johnny Unitas. Lamar is also 5th in career winning percentage by a quarterback. As we mentioned, wins are not a QB stat. It's a team stat, but I do think they can give you insight. Like Jimmy Garoppolo is 6th in quarterback win percentage. So it's not a perfect stat, obviously,
Certainly
but
not.
It does give you a context with what the quarterback's role is. I think the thing that would keep Lamar off my list right now is just the complete lack of playoff success.
Yeah.
But the thing that I think Lamar has going for him and why I'm so confident is how mistake-free Lamar normally plays on a game-to-game basis. It's like, I think a lot of people took issue with the fact that I had him over Johnny Unitas, that I had him over Brett Favre, that I had him over John Elway. And specifically in terms of peak. And when we're looking at those guys, because I think that conversation is more interesting than looking at them on a career scale, Elway, one of the most turnover-prone quarterbacks in NFL history. Brett Favre, one of the most turnover-prone quarterbacks in NFL history. And, and that's how I look at it. I look at their peak, Carson, but I also look at, what quarterback would I get on a game-to-game basis at their apex? Brett Favre is still going to probably turn the ball over. John Elway is probably still going to turn the ball over. Johnny U, when we're looking at skill, and it's so hard to compare that era to this because it's such a different football game.
Johnny U was clear, bro. Johnny U was running laps around his peers.
Sure, but
he
if
was
we're looking at
leading
this,
in passing yards every year and passer rating every other year.
And I know people aren't going to like this take, and it's not the best argument I could make about this, but
this is going to be so ageist.
Lamar's the greatest athlete we've ever seen at the position, and it's just like, sorry, man. Johnny Unitas is not...
Josh? Cam?
Josh is
Lamar's
great.
number one?
Lamar's a freak, man. Lamar is insane.
For sure. I'm just thinking, athlete, are we just talking about running ability? Because then, of course, it's Lamar.
Yeah,
I think
when I'm just... That's what I'm looking at.
Arm strength, size, frame. All right, sure.
And so, that's why I would have him there. And that's why I think you can argue Lamar already there because of his just ability, how efficient he is as a quarterback, how mistake-free Lamar normally plays. And we've seen him... I don't think Lamar has reached his peak yet. I think we are seeing Lamar grow into the passer that he's going to become. That's why I think you could argue it. That being said, I wouldn't argue it right now. Like when we're talking about legacy, I think Johnny U still clears him. Steve Young, to me, still clearly clears Lamar.
Yeah.
But peak for peak, I think you could still argue. I'd still probably take Dan Marino just because I trust Dan in the playoffs. When I know Dan never had the playoff success, Dan Marino put up some stinkers in the playoffs too, certainly. I need to see more playoff success before I would stamp Lamar as a top 10 quarterback. But you're right. You could make an argument for him, and I would hear you out. It's not a ridiculous argument to make at this point in Lamar's career.
I have him top 20 right now. I think his peak is a little bit higher than that, but I am thinking like all-time ranking, not just pure peaks. I think the top 10 is pretty concrete. Then the dudes who I have right outside of that, Elway, Favre, Josh, Ben, Bart Starr, Kurt Warner. I think all those dudes have peaks that are at least close enough to Lamar's. I think that Josh's peak is higher. But everybody else, Lamar's probably peaked higher than. I think Favre is really, really close, actually. I'd probably still take Favre just because of the playoff difference. Also, we got to shout out Bart Starr, Logan. Unbelievable playoff performer. Unbelievable efficiency for his time. Nobody disrespect Bart Starr. Warner's peak is close. But Lamar can definitely go peak to peak with a lot of these dudes. It's just, the longevity is the separator. Then there's two dudes who I think are interesting because Lamar's peak is very clearly higher, but then you're just balancing the longevity. Phillip Rivers, which I know you're going to be upset about, Logan. Well, I'm taking Lamar for a game. I'm taking Lamar for a season. It's just Phillip Rivers is 6th in passing yards and touchdowns, man. For God's sakes, he did it for so long.
I thought
if you were ranking them all time today, you would take Lamar higher.
I'd take Lamar. That's not close to me. I thought you were going to say Stafford or Matt Ryan.
Wow, you think those guys are better all time than Phil? Matt Ryan better than
Yeah.
Phil?
No,
Matt Ryan?
Yes. All day long. All day long.
Matt Ryan's even odd year ass. Every other year he's an elite quarterback.
I know one of them he's going to be good.
Rivers. Dude, Phillip Rivers was so good. Phillip Rivers was a top 5 quarterback for more than a decade. That's rare. Hey, you're going to act like that's not true? Name me the 5 quarterbacks who were better.
I can. Okay. I will.
All right, let's go. From
Brady,
2000,
Peyton, Breeze,
2000
Ben, done. We're done.
Brady,
We're out of
Peyton,
there,
Breeze,
man.
Ben, that's 4.
I can't count. Fuck.
I mean, okay, hold on.
Rodgers.
I'll
I didn't say
actually help
Rodgers.
you.
I didn't say Rodgers.
Yeah. There's your
Done.
5th. I don't agree that Ben was consistently better
Yes.
than Phillip Rivers.
Yes. Come on, Carson. This is your worst take ever. This is your worst. Dude, I love you. I think you are a brilliant mind, Carson. That's your worst
Phillip
one.
Rivers.
That's why I hate him, because people want to put him in conversations with Big Ben, and he's not. He never
Ben
was.
is easily better. All time.
Ugh.
Well, easily, I think he's a few spots higher. I think there were individual years in which Phillip Rivers played better football than Ben Roethlisberger.
Sure.
Overall, I'd take Ben. I don't think there's a big difference individually. Rivers led a lead offense after
Phillip
elite
could
offense,
never
man.
create at the level that Ben could, man.
He was ballsy, bro. He couldn't create athletically in terms of moving around, but he had the arm and he had the audacity. He was an elevator. He was unequivocally an elevator of offenses. And he sustained it for more than a decade again. 2018, he still had an awesome season. All right, anyways, I think he's top 20. I don't get Matt Ryan over Phillip Rivers. I don't.
Matt has an MVP. Phillip Rivers doesn't.
Well, bro, oh, come on. If you put Phillip Rivers in that offense, come on now. Prime Phillip Rivers in that offense.
It's not that different, bro.
It's better. It's slightly
better.
better.
It's not that different.
It's 10% better.
Maybe.
I'd take Phil.
I don't know. Rivers had some good offensive. I mean, he had LT at the start of his career. He had Antonio Gates. He had Vincent Jackson. Keenan Allen.
They were definitely stacked. They were also like the best offense in football damn near every year. They were top 5 offense every single year. Let's see how long they go. Bro, they're like the Phoenix Suns of that time. They're an elite offense every year. They didn't have the defense, and so, they don't have the Super Bowl. They don't have the ring. I think the Suns are a little better version of the equivalent because they're literally like GOAT-level offenses. But anyways, put some respect on Phil's name. The other dude, Logan, Russell Wilson. I'm still high on Russ all time.
It's so hard to gauge now just because of how bad Russ has been.
But that's what I'm saying. I think that's caused such a disrespect in hindsight towards his peak. 2015 to 2020, Logan.
I know.
Russ had the most passing touchdowns in football. He was 195 touchdowns to 55 picks while being one of the best movers and runners in the sport. He was 4th in passer rating. And he did that in shitty circumstances. Like, that's what I hate. People are retroactively going back and calling him a game manager or whatever because he was as a rookie. Still one of the best rookie quarterbacks we've seen. But, the first couple years of his career, he's just limiting mistakes and riding the defense because the defense was awesome. Then he started carrying.
5, man.
Their line sucked. Their run game sucked. And yet every year you looked up and the Seahawks won 11 games. They won 10 games. And, his ability to squeeze out clutch wins was unbelievable. We looked at the game-winning drives. Where is he? He's top 10 all time.
I'd probably take Lamar just because I think Lamar is singularly better as an offensive elevator. But that one is close.
And I don't disagree at all. And that's what I'm saying. If we're going peak to peak, I don't think for a second I'm taking Lamar. If against Russ, against Rivers, against Ben, Lamar's peak absolutely clears all these dudes. My point is just Russ did it for more than a decade.
For sure.
Rivers did it for more than a decade. I do think that needs to be balanced, but I don't know. I think those two are very close. So right now I'd probably have him 19, but his peak is top 15. I do need to see more from him in the playoffs to move him up. He's 9 total touchdowns to 9 turnovers. That's not going to cut it. We haven't seen anything close to a signature playoff performance from him. And that's not looking at team results. He's let them down. Their offense has been bad in the playoffs. That's on him. He's got to be able to play from behind. He's got to be better as a thrower of the football in the playoffs. I do think he's improved there, absolutely. We just have to see it in the playoffs. The names who I had just behind him, Logan, let's see if I can make you any angrier. Len Dawson, respect Len Dawson, efficiency GOAT, led the league in pass rating 6 of 7 years, and a Super Bowl champ. Tarkenton, Moon, Fouts, Romo, Kelly, Stafford, Ryan. I think he's clear of all those dudes. All right.
Stafford's kind of low, but I agree with.
Well, that wasn't in an exact order.
Okay,
those are just the next group of dudes who I had. Honestly, I'd probably have Stafford after just Dawson and Tarkenton.
Okay.
I think Stafford's a dog. I think Stafford's so underrated all time, except by you. You love Matt Stafford, as do I. Okay, we have another question about a Ravens quarterback's all-time ranking. Digworthy Marshall, does Joe Flacco make the Hall of Fame? And more importantly, Logan, the everlasting question, is he elite?
Joe Flacco's always been elite, man. Joe Flacco has always been elite. Don't let the haters tell you differently. Not a freaking chance. I mean, when we're looking at the NFL Hall of Fame, more so than any other sports Hall of Fame, is like the most exclusive. Baseball is pretty exclusive too, just because if you have any scandal, the baseball's not going to like. That's why I also think the Baseball Hall of Fame is kind of a joke too. The fact that they don't have Barry Bonds or Pete Rose in their Hall of Fame, I don't know if Roger Clemens has gotten in there. That to me. And I get those guys desecrated the game or whatever, but it's like, oh my God, man.
Yeah, Barry Bonds is like
also
the second greatest baseball player ever.
I think Barry Bonds is the greatest baseball player ever.
I was giving Babe a little love for also being an ace pitcher at his prime, but I mean Barry Bonds' numbers are unthinkable. There's no parallel in any other sport.
Nothing.
To what
There's
Barry
this great
Bonds
video that John Boys did a while back. Shout out John Boys. He did it if Barry Bonds played baseball without a bat, or like played his 2004 season without a bat.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he does this breakdown where he finds out that Barry would have had a higher on-base percentage if he had walked
logistically, Logan, don't you think they would have pitched to him if he didn't have a bat?
Well, the thought exercise, he said Barry could go up there with a bat, but he couldn't swing, and he would have had a higher on-base percentage if he never swung, which just tells you about the gravity of him as a player.
Insane.
And I also
saw a clip, I think it was from the Dan Patrick Show. I want to say it was about the insane year that Judge is having, but it might have been about Ohtani's season. It was one of the two, right? The two best hitters in the game today. And they read off all these insane stats, and they were like, and that would be the 11th best season of Barry Bonds' career.
Yeah.
It's unreal.
And it's sad because everybody that you talk to will say that Barry would have been the greatest baseball player ever if he hadn't have taken the roids. You know,
what's he supposed to do? Everybody was doping.
And hot take, they can hate on it. Doping saved baseball. You can argue with a wall. Baseball's numbers were in the toilet, and then McGwire and Sosa had the home run battle. It got everybody back into the game, and they loved it. I think steroids saved baseball.
Here's my final take on this. Oh, go ahead.
I have one more thought.
Okay.
They should allow juicing. They should let them do roids, man.
This I don't agree with. Here's what I will say makes Barry different from a Sosa or a McGwire. If you just take his career pre-steroids, he's a Hall of Famer. That's a Hall of Fame career right there. So you're not withholding his admission because you're like, we don't know that he would have been the caliber of player. You're just doing it because you feel that his scandal disgraced the game. And to me, it's like, is that what the Hall of Fame is about? Is it supposed to be a good boys club of all the good little boys and we come in and pat them on the head and we say good boy? Or is it supposed to be a history of the game that reflects its greatest players? I think the latter. But anyways, that's a topic for another time. Joe Flacco, Logan, is no Barry Bonds.
Also, man, I mean, they let Ty Cobb in the Hall of Fame. Ty Cobb's a horrible racist and a bigot, man. I mean, come on, dude.
Oh, my God. I'm sure there's all sorts of racists that are in there. Are you kidding me? When the game was at its heyday?
Yeah, I mean,
how many Klansmen were there running around? Let's just be real.
Like, I don't know, man.
Redneck Robinson and the boys. Come on.
Yeah. Anyways, this is all a long-winded way to say, if Joe Flacco was like a basketball player and this was his resume, Flacco would be a Hall of Famer. But that's what I do love about the NFL is they make it so exclusive that you have to be one of the game's greatest players at your position. And I think they've gone a little too far in some respects. Like, I think there are some guys that still aren't in the Hall that should be. But, yeah, Joe was just never one of the top 5 guys at his position. And I think when you're looking at quarterback, that's a prerequisite. Like, Rivers, I think will get in the Hall of Fame, and probably deservedly so. I think Stafford should get in the Hall of Fame. I don't know if he will. But Flacco just doesn't have the individual numbers to support him getting in there. And the guy that I will point to as to why Flacco shouldn't get in is that people are debating if Eli should be in the Hall of Fame. I think Eli should be in the Hall of Fame because those 2 runs alone cement him as an all-time great. But it's like if people are debating Eli, I think it probably should signal to you that Flacco is not going to get in. But That's one of the greatest runs ever by a quarterback in a single
Yeah.
playoff run. And for that, I will always give Joe credit. He made one of the greatest throws ever to Jacoby Jones up the sideline to stun the Broncos. He made all the throws he needed to against an. It's one of the greatest playoff runs ever. And for that, Joe is cemented as one of the greats.
He doesn't have a chance at the Hall of Fame, though. There's only 26 quarterbacks in the Hall of Fame ever, to put it into perspective. And if we're ranking quarterbacks from Flacco's prime, I mean, we were having a debate about Rivers being top 5 in the great era of quarterbacks.
I mean,
I'd
I'd probably still take Carson Palmer over Joe Flacco, right?
I agree. I mean, there are dudes peak to peak who I think were way higher, right? I think Carson Palmer, not way higher, but I would take his peak. Romo, I think his efficiency is all-time great. He gets underrated, absolutely better than Flacco. Cam obviously is in a different stratosphere.
I'd
but
take Dak over Flacco probably.
Yeah, well, that's really the tail end of Flacco's prime. I'm looking hard of his prime, right? If we look like early 2010s, these are dudes who over multiple years, not like one-year wonder, not high peaks, but they weren't consistently healthy. Brady, Peyton, Rodgers, Breeze, Ben, Rivers, Stafford, Ryan, Russ, Luck. There's not a conversation about any of those dudes. That's 10 right there. And I think Eli was better. So I'm sorry, if you're the 12th best quarterback of your little window, you don't have a chance. Here are some more stats, Logan, that just clarify how little of a case Joe Flacco has. 189 career games. He's given you 263 total touchdowns to 190 picks. Not very good. Averaged 6.8 yards per attempt and has a passer rating of 84. Since Joe Flacco entered the league, there are 59 quarterbacks who have attempted at least 1,000 passes. Flacco is dead last in passer rating. Not a perfect stat, but my God, he's 53rd of 59 guys in yards per attempt.
I mean, don't let 2 good comeback seasons cloud you from the fact Flacco could give you a pick, man. He was going to give you a couple,
Absolutely. He had one awesome playoff run, as you mentioned. Awesome. So did Nick Foles. So did Doug Williams. The reality is 3 or 4 games does not make a Hall of Fame career when you are otherwise an average quarterback in the NFL Hall of Fame standard is so high. I don't think Flacco has a chance.
Yeah, and this is tail end too. I'd probably still take, like the couple years of Favre that we got, or Warner at that time. And that's early Flacco and
That's
older
early
versions
Flacco.
of those guys. But yeah, Flacco's an average all-time quarterback, but got that ring, man. Got that ring. You can't ever take it away from him.
Can't take it away. It's an incredible accomplishment. It's just something that doesn't need to be conflated with who he was as a player overall and elevate him into conversations he doesn't need to be in. I get that it's hard to resist, but you got to think, man, they may be the 4 most important games of his life and he stepped up and balled. It's still 4 games out of 300.
And it's also one of the greatest defenses of all time. That's why they won the Super Bowl.
Yeah. Sorry, Joe, you don't have a chance. All right. Back to current day football, Logan. Are the Cowboys too reliant on their quarterback more than any other team, considering the way the defense is constructed and has been performing against the pass and the rush?
Yeah, of course. I mean, this is one of the most quarterback-reliant teams in football. I think Dak is great, but it's not the most sustainable formula, and that's what I bank on with the team. It's not a knock on Dak that they have to lean on him this much. It's just the state of where the Cowboys are at. The best teams in football year after year, the most reliable formula, in my opinion, and this may make me sound like a freaking boomer, but teams that can play defense and teams that can run the football. Quarterback is the most important position in football, obviously, but the things that are going to carry you through when it's cold as hell, when the games are on the line, if you can run the ball and you can play defense, your team is probably going to be really good. The defense is still lackluster. I'm not saying they're not talented. They're underperforming. They're underwhelming. The running game blows. It's one of the worst in all the NFL, and that just means that there's an extra burden on Dak Prescott to be great. There's less margin for error in an individual football game when you aren't great around the quarterback position. It's just more stress on Dak. And so, yes, I do think they are too reliant on Dak. That's one of their biggest fundamental limiters, in my opinion, of why they can't win the Super Bowl. And there's just other ripple things that happen. The offense becomes more predictable when you can't run the ball, which means teams can they're not going to load up the box more, which is going to put more stress on your receivers. They can put more attention on your receivers and limit the passing game because they're not scared of the running game. a balanced team, I'm always going to prefer more than the team with the better quarterback. Is Dak Prescott a better quarterback than Jared Goff? Unequivocally, in my opinion. Would I rather bet on the Lions or the Cowboys? I'd rather take Detroit because they're a better team. So, yeah, I think that's one of the fundamental flaws with Dallas is that they are. I think it's a flaw of Dallas and why they can't win the Super Bowl, but I also think it's a testament to Dak as a quarterback at this point in his career that they've been so great and so consistently good in the regular season without great surrounding pieces.
I agree with basically everything that you've just said. Although I do think it's worth noting that, like, the Cowboys teams of the last few years have been better defenses. They've been much better regular season defenses. And really, until last year, they could still run the ball quite effectively. But in their current iteration, yes, they're too reliant on Dak. And it's not a Dak thing. They're just not a complete Super Bowl caliber team unless that defense improves. Defense has to improve. By the way, shout out Gavin for asking this question. I didn't want to rob you of the joy of hearing me say your name with my buttery smooth voice. Okay, Ryan asks Logan, what's your take on the too high safety debate? How do you think offenses will adapt to the shifts in defensive personnel and schemes across the league? And do you think giving young quarterbacks more time to develop and adjust to NFL defenses before playing them is part of the solution?
Yeah, this is a really good question. So I think the shift that offenses should do is run the ball more when they're coming out against these too high safety looks. And the solution for young quarterbacks facing this coverage, I think the issue that we're seeing with young quarterbacks is offensive coordinators and teams aren't comfortable with them making decisions at the line of scrimmage. I've always said this about quarterbacks. It's the reason that made Tom Brady so great. It's the reason that made Peyton Manning so great. It's giving them autonomy and trusting them at the line of scrimmage to change things. It's an issue with young quarterbacks because you don't trust them enough. It's also an issue because they don't have the camaraderie with receivers to give them a little look. Or, Big Ben and Antonio Brown, you look at them and they just had this chemistry where at the line of scrimmage, Ben could look at AB and it was like hey, we got an advantage. We got a mismatch. You run the route that I want you to run. Or I'm going to tap on my head. I'm going to give you a look and you're going to adjust to this route and we're going to know what we're running. That's what I think is the biggest issue with young quarterbacks stepping into the league. I don't think you should leash them or handcuff them to your offensive system. That's the biggest advantage that a quarterback has at the line of scrimmage to go, they're coming out in cover 3, so we're going to audible the slot guy to run on a seam to pick apart that zone, right? So I think that's what coordinators, they should trust their young quarterbacks more. They should work on adjusting things at the line of scrimmage because I think that's the biggest strength that any team has is being able to adjust at the line of scrimmage and pick against a certain defense, right? You just don't have that if you're putting them in a rigid system with a rigid play call. I think they should trust them more. And so, yeah, I don't think it's a part of them developing or adjusting to NFL defenses. That's certainly a component of it, but I think it's more about giving them a longer leash at the line of scrimmage and letting them make more decisions. That was why Brady was so great. That's why Peyton was so great. These veteran quarterbacks just had instincts and chemistry with their receivers where they could go, hey, they're going to give us this look. Well, we're going to pick against that look. And I just don't think that young quarterbacks are being given the tools and the skill sets to do that at the line of scrimmage. I think quarterbacks in the 2000s were better than that. I also think they were more experienced, and I think coordinators trusted them to make decisions more at the line of scrimmage than you're seeing with young quarterbacks today.
Well, but we're seeing more rookies start than ever before, and we've actually seen more
very true.
Great rookie seasons in recent years. I mean, you think about all the contenders, Herbert, Baker, Stroud, these are all within the last 7 years. Luck, just 5 years before that, although that was a pretty different NFL landscape. But I think the challenge is just, I mean, you talk about what makes Brady great, what makes Peyton great, that ability to diagnose things at the line of scrimmage, sure, but not when they were rookies. Brady didn't play as a rookie. Peyton led the league in picks as a rookie. So I do think that's a lot to put on a rookie quarterback. I mean, we see the same thing with rookie centers, right? Where they aren't the communication leaders for an offense that they'd like to be later in their career just because they're still new to diagnosing things at this level. So I really think it is just on the play calling and the offensive coordinators in a lot of this situation to simplify offenses. I actually kind of disagree with you. Like, I think you look at what Cliff Kingsbury has done with Jaden Daniels. That, to me, is the dream path. You
to simplify
use things that's been effective. Yeah, you make that adjustment from college football to the NFL as seamless as possible. You give him as good of a run game as you can. You use screens a lot, right? Just so there isn't that overwhelming pressure on the quarterback to consistently be making high-level reads and to be pushing the ball downfield every down. And simply put, like, some OCs are just more creative and better at drawing up plays than others. I don't think that that's necessarily a too high issue. I just think that's a rookie quarterback thing. And rookie quarterbacks throughout the course of NFL history have struggled. But now, because we've seen some exceptions to that in recent years, we have more of an expectation that they should be able to go out there and play immediately. And I think because the NFL game has become more similar to college football than ever before, right? You have dual threat quarterbacks in the NFL in a way that you didn't ever before. You have spread offenses in the NFL in a way that you didn't ever before, right? Things are becoming more similar, but they are still different. And it is still hard for rookie quarterbacks to really digest everything all at once intellectually at the NFL level. So I kind of think that that's a separate point than the too high thing. If you're talking about the debate in the sense of like Mel Kiper being like, should we ban this?
That's like the dumbest take of all time, bro. That's
it's
like
not
the stupidest take of all time.
And I tried to think about equivalence in terms of disadvantaging the defense in the rule book in a major way, right? A fundamental way like that to make for a better product. And the closest thing that I could think of, well, obviously there's been rule changes in football, right? Illegal contact. We see all sorts of rule changes now to protect the quarterback, but nothing as fundamental as where you can align your players defensively. Closest thing I could think of was in the NBA, adding defensive 3 in the key. I still think that that is quite different. Or basically banning zone defense for a time in the NBA. I still think that that's different, and the reason is football is so much more about what you do pre-play. It is so much more determined by coaching itself, by strategy itself. Like, NBA fundamentally is a read and react game. Of course you can have a coaching advantage. Of course you can draw up plays situationally, and teams do. It's part of having a functioning offense. Designed offense is good. It's statistically more efficient. But huge portions of the game are just based on feel and improvisation, and they take place in transition, right? All these elements that make it so it's not nearly as purely determined by coaching, by your ability to disguise things pre-play. I mean, every single snap in the NFL, the offense is drawing up a complex play. The defense is planning a complex play. They are trying to figure out how they can each bluff, trick the other, disguise what they're doing, figure out the counters. If the offense sees something they feel they need to adjust to, they do it. Defense does the same. Like, coaching is just everything, and strategy and scheme is everything in football. That single-handedly wins you games. And to take away the ability to play the scheme that you think is most effective, to give the look that you think is most effective, is just insane in a sport where that is so huge.
Well said. I think we were all collectively made dumber by Mel Kiper opening his pie hole. This was one of the stupidest things I've ever heard from. I kind of liked Mel Kiper as an NFL mind. I didn't mind some of his. I mean, he's been very wrong in a lot of different instances.
Sure.
Like, obviously, his
draft,
infamous.
It's impossible not to be.
His infamous draft moments where he had that blow up with the Colts general manager. That was his classic moment. His classic one, if Jimmy Clausen isn't a great NFL starter in 7 seasons, you can have my job. Well, we got receipts on that one. This was the dumbest.
7 seasons.
I don't know, dude. It was live during the broadcast. He was like, in 7 years, if Jimmy Clausen isn't one of the best quarterbacks in the league, you can have my job. Okay. This was the dumbest one. And yeah, football is about adjustments.
Yeah.
And
well,
Yeah, man. Hey, Mel, I'm sorry they didn't score a touchdown when you were in the press box. Sorry, buddy. Some of us
Dude.
enjoy defensive football games. Like,
And also his rationale of like, I want to see shot plays like I saw back in my day with Kenny Stabler and Terry Bradshaw. It's like, yeah, dude, those shot plays were available because everybody was in the box because teams ran the ball 70% of the time. So now everything has gone so dramatically in the other direction. What do offenses have to do? They have to achieve the balance. Like you say, you run the ball more, you hit more screens, you hit more flat routes, you take the checkdowns. And he's talking about how all these great quarterbacks have been turned into checkdown artists. Yeah, we're not seeing the same number of explosive plays as we were a couple years ago, but like, you can't disadvantage the defense just because of that. Like, this is an intellectual game, and there are going to be ebbs and flows like this where the offense gets ahead and the defense catches up, and then the offense figures out a new way to get ahead. And by the way, like, we're still seeing some of these elite quarterbacks rip these big plays. Like, if you have the necessary quarterback talent and receiver talent and you can protect long enough, you can still let it rip in spots versus cover two. And if you run the ball so well, you can force them to bring those safeties down. And like, if teams are playing nickel and they're lighter, they're in these smaller packages, you run the ball on them. I just don't think that it's that complicated, and I don't think that this has been like devastating to the product. I don't know. I think people are kind of overly freaking out about quarterback play and offense in the league right now. I get it that numbers are down, but I don't think that we're watching ugly football out there. I don't think that the product is bad, and I don't think that you can mess with the legitimacy of the game itself to try to salvage that. Let offenses figure it out. They will. So that's my take on that. Okay. Logan, Pick Six Jair asks, who is the first coach to be fired this year?
Doug Peterson.
Next
I
question.
will not elaborate.
Preston asks, how long of a leash does Dennis Allen have? If the Saints miss the playoffs again, it's hard to imagine he stays another year.
Yeah, the interesting thing with this is I just think that Clint Kubiak is kind of nipping at his heels right now. Like, he's a really good offensive mind. I don't think Dennis Allen is a very good coach. I didn't think Dennis Allen was a good coach when he got the Raiders job back in the mid-2010s. I still don't really think he's a good coach. So, I mean, yeah, if they miss the playoffs this year, I could definitely see Clint Kubiak taking that job. I mean, he's just a smarter offensive mind. And so I don't know if you want a different, like, team leader. But the way I view it, it's kind of like the Lions thing with Ben Johnson, how everybody was talking about Ben Johnson is going to leave, so you need to offer him the head coaching job so he doesn't leave. I didn't think that was true for Detroit because I think Ben Johnson knows the special talent he has here. I do think that's the situation here in New Orleans. A lot of teams are going to hit Clint Kubiak's phone that want to restart, that want to rekindle and ignite their offense. That's where I think the Saints are probably going to have to bite the bullet and do it. And I don't think that's a bad decision. I don't think Dennis Allen is a good coach. I think Clint Kubiak's a good offensive mind. I'd go ahead and I'd make it happen. So I think if they miss the playoffs, I think that is his leash. I think I think I'd let him go if he missed the playoffs after this year.
And also on the Detroit point, you'd be giving up on a great head coach. Like, obviously, Ben Johnson is an awesome offensive coordinator, but Dan Campbell is a culture setter of the highest caliber that you're going to find. Dennis Allen is not that. I'm with you, bro. If it comes between him and Clint Kubiak, under any circumstances, I would choose Kubiak. I think Dennis Allen is a Clint Kubiak merchant. I don't think it's coincidental that the Saints are playing their best football now that they have a great offensive coordinator when really not much around that has changed. If they do make the playoffs, though, I don't think that they're going to fire Dennis Allen, but if it comes down to him versus Kubiak, I would choose Kubiak. All right, user, a series of numbers, asks, would current Brady with no prep be a better quarterback than Bryce Young?
Yes.
Yeah, I agree completely. I mean, bro, it's only a couple years ago that we saw him as a legitimate high-end NFL starter. He doesn't have to be able to move. He's just too smart. I think his arm would still be better than Bryce's. I mean, he's just got more physical tools, remarkably, as a 47-year-old man still. But more than anything, it's just he's so much smarter. It'd be dangerous. It wouldn't be great. It'd be better than Bryce Young. I think we can agree on that.
I don't think you'd be able to rattle Brady the way that you can rattle Bryce. But he's just so composed.
Dude, he'd be out there, nothing to lose. He'd be cool as a cucumber. The only problem is when he gets hit, they'd have to bring out the stretcher. But shit, better than Bryce. My God, he needs a psychologist. He needs counseling. Brady, he'd be fine. Vaughn Jones, Logan, asks, what are the two of you doing to repair the Arizona Cardinals franchise, and what more should you be doing?
Shout out Vaughn. What's up,
Shout
Vaughn?
out Vaughn.
Michigan.
All right. Shout out Vaughn. There's really nothing to answer that question. I just wanted to shout out Vaughn, old friend of ours.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Cardinals are on a good trajectory, honestly. I like Jonathan Gannon. I think that I would just draft more defense. I think you really need an edge rusher, an impactful member of the defensive line. That's where I'd start repairing this team. But I don't think they're bad. Like, I like what the offense is building. You can run the ball. I think the offensive line is all right. The skill position talent is cool. I believe in Kyler as your franchise guy. I think it's about getting stronger in the trenches on both sides of the ball and just rebuilding this defense. And I don't think it'll be this year. I don't think it'll be next year. I think in 2 years, I think the Cardinals could be real contenders if everything goes right in the draft and free agency and you can retain key guys. But they've got a solid offensive foundation with this running game, with Kyler, with Marvin Harrison, and Michael Wilson. I think they've got something brewing offensively.
And you didn't even mention Greg Dortch.
Or Trey McBride.
That's what I'm saying, dude. That receiving room is good. Yeah, it's all about the defense. I think the offense is there, and I think the offense will remain there, but you got to completely overhaul the defense, basically, except for, of course, the great Budda Baker. And I do like Gardeck. I think that he's good. All right. Another Cardinals question. Wumbo asks, how tall would Kyler Murray have to be a top 5 quarterback in the league?
I think if he's 6 foot, I could hear a debate, man. I think that's probably the marker. Like, he just is just a little too small. If he was 6 foot, I'd hear a debate, man. That guy's freakishly talented. The only thing I wonder, though, a part of the reason why Kyler is so dynamic is because he's so agile because of his little legs. Like, I think that he gets up to top speed and can change direction. I mean, dude, he can change direction so fast, and he gets up to top speed so quickly. I wonder if he was taller, if you'd lose some of that acceleration and agility.
6 foot, though. It's just 6 foot. I think it's a net positive. I don't think that you're really losing out on that ability. If you just gave him another 2 inches, he'd be capable of some great things. Not the first time you heard that one, huh, Logan? Okay, Anish has a question for us. Would you rather have Theo as your head of scouting, Bladen as your slot wide receiver, or Matt as your head coach? These are, of course, the 3 members of the Stay Hot podcast, our friends over at Stay Hot.
Oh, well, first of all, I think we would be blessed to just have these gentlemen in our organization. I think they all bring their strengths. Bladen brings some experience at the position, really, really talented wide receiver. Matt, I think, as a head coach, the stoicism we would have at the head coaching spot, like,
you wonder if he'd even call plays. You wonder if he'd even ever challenge a play, or if he'd just be chilling.
That's what I like, man. I think he brings a good vibe to the team.
And the players would come into the locker room and they'd say, "Spawn Hour Masterclass. Loved what you did out there today, Matt." Dude, and he wouldn't say a word.
Not getting too high.
Nope.
Not getting too low. I like that, man.
You like him.
A strong borderline. I like that, man.
And the Lions were interested in Spawn Hour for a time. Not as a coach, but as a player. They drafted him.
Yeah.
He's only 13 is the only problem.
He's a big-ass 13-year-old, man. He's a big-ass 13-year-old.
I believe he's on the roids, yeah.
I'm probably taking Theo, though, man. I really value that football IQ. I think that Theo would come in and he'd turn our franchise around with, 2 drafts. We'd go from worst team in the NFL to the best, man. I think he'd just be deep diving in his dungeon with his scouting reports, and we'd build a football monster very quickly. But all 3 of these guys in the organization together, we'd be unstoppable.
Here's what would be interesting about putting Bladen out there. Just seeing how a guy looks against NFL talent, like the old theoretical experiment of what if you went out there in an NBA game, NFL game. And I know that Bladen's played receiver, but nevertheless, let's be real. Well, maybe he was going to make it to the league before he tore his ACL. It's a story we've all heard so many times. But that would be kind of an interesting experiment. However, I agree, it's Theo. I think Theo could do it. Why not? Also, the draft's always a crapshoot. People miss anyways. Theo's already diving in. He's certainly the closest comparison we could find. Give me Theo. The only problem is he's going to freak out all the prospects because he's an odd guy. That's going to be the only problem. He's going to be staring at birds, and he's going to forget to actually look down on the field and see what's going on. But yeah, shout out Stay Hot, man. Lots of good candidates. Altogether, I agree. I think they save an organization. All right, everybody. There were your questions. We answered them all. Hope you liked it. If you did, the good news is there's plenty more Nerd Sesh content. You can find all of our full NFL and NBA shows on our YouTube channel. We, of course, reacted to this past week's games, and we will be reacting to them again this Sunday. But before then, we'll have another NBA division preview, so stay locked in for all of that. You can also on our YouTube channel see some of the video essays, film breakdowns that we do on both the NBA and the NFL now. Logan's been doing some. You can listen to the show across all audio platforms. You can follow us across social, TikTok, Instagram, @NerdSesh, Twitter, @nerd_sesh. You can join our Discord if you just want to chat with the gang. The link to that is at the link tree across our social media bios. And with that, as always, appreciate you guys. Thank you for all the questions. If we didn't get to your question, I'm sorry. Next time you ask a question, we will answer it. I've been Carson Brabber.
I've been Logan Camden.
And this was Nerd Sesh.